All right, what we're going to start with today is our first lab of the class. And so, in order to turn in your work to me, we are going to turn in our work on GitHub. And so, you'll make a GitHub repository. I'm going to walk you through these steps. These steps are outlined in the lab document itself, but I figured I'll just walk through them to kind of help everyone get started for the first time. So, where everyone will want to start for this lab is by pulling up the lab requirements that are on Inside Rankin. It's a GitHub document. So, you want to have that pulled up. And for your reference, but all I'm doing is walking through these steps. And so, of course, we're going to start on github.com. You're going to need to be logged in on GitHub. And you're going to make a repository. You're going to make a GitHub repo. And so the way that you're going to do that is with this plus symbol, and then you're going to click on New Repository.
Professor, I don't think you're, unless I'm missing something, I don't think you're sharing your screen right
You
now.
are right. Let me take care of that. Now, if you only have one account, I don't think you have to choose an owner. I think it kind of defaults, but I kind of have a couple things going on here. So I have to choose an owner. So I'm just going to make it this Evan Gudmestead account. And as the lab says, we're going to name this AWD1111 hyphen lab 0101. And we're going to mark this as private. So there's a radio button here to, you can kind of see it's basically private for you. And we're going to click to add a README. On the git ignore, we're going to search for node. So our git ignore template is node, and the git ignore is a file that says, hey, ignore these unimportant files that you don't need to kind of move from your local machine up onto GitHub. So that's what a git ignore is. And we're going to choose the MIT license, which basically says, you can use my code however you wish. If you were to share this with somebody, this is not proprietary code that that you can't use. This is open source, so to speak. This says this will set master as the default branch. Yours might say main. That's totally fine. Let's click on create repository. Okay, this creates the repository on github.com, but we need to essentially bring this down onto our local computer. The way to do that is you have to have your software of choice. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on this green button for code, and you're going to notice this is the URL to my Git repo. It ends in .git, and you click on this little copy button, and that URL is going to be what you need. From this point, probably GitHub Desktop is going to be the most intuitive tool. And so I'm going to kind of minimize this. Now, on my computer, you need to decide where this repo is going to go. I'm probably just going to make a folder on my desktop, and you can put it in my documents, wherever. I'm just going to say AWD1111 repos. So this is my folder that I'm going to essentially put all of my repos for this class. And I'm going to have this on my desktop. You have to choose where you want it on your computer. Then I'm going to open up GitHub Desktop. This is obviously software that we downloaded already and installed. Okay, and I'll actually come back to this because if I go back to the lab, the next steps in the lab is to add your instructor as a collaborator. So I go back to github.com, and the way to do that is under the settings link. So I got this little icon for settings. And then we're going to go to manage access. Now this is a little bit different nowadays. It's now under collaborators. So let me update this. I'm going to take a new snippet. Click on collaborators. So we're going to click on collaborators. Enter your password if prompted. Click on add people. And you're going to add my user account, Evan Gudmestead, EVAN. No, I'm already, it's not going to find it. Can you verify, Grant, if you're doing this, that you can find my account?
Yes, I think I found it.
Yep. And then add me as a collaborator and give me an admin role. Is admin an option, Grant, or has that name even changed?
I don't see that.
What are the options for you if it's not admin?
It didn't give me an option. It just said I just sent the invitation.
Okay, that's all I really need. Um, and so here I could see Grant has invited me, so I'll accept his invitation. And this is what I need from each student. This will be how I grade your work. Now, back to cloning it, right? So once you have an online GitHub repo, you need to clone that directory onto your local machine. So the way to do that is back in GitHub Desktop. Should have that booted up. Okay, I'm going to close this repo. Um, your screen doesn't look like mine, but what you need to do is click on the File menu and click on Clone Repository. And what you do is you go to the URL, so you can see three buttons here. And there's multiple ways of doing this. I prefer clicking on the URL. I'm going to paste in that URL from before, and it's no longer on my clipboard. Somehow I lost it. So let me go back to my repo, your repositories, AWD Lab 0101. Click on that, copy, copy, and you paste it right here. Okay, now pay attention to the local path. Notice this is not going to my desktop, so I'm going to change that. I want to put it in that desktop folder. So I'm going to go back to desktop, and then here's my repos. So it's at least in that desktop repos, and it will make a new folder for me, AWD, with the same name as my repository. So it'll make a subfolder for me if I click on clone. Um, this is a working state. Okay, now what do we do next? I'm going to go into that folder, and I'm going to work my way. So I'm going to right click that folder, and I'm going to open with code, and I'm going to work through the first lab. Now, there's a step 4 in this lab, which um, there's a lot of these steps have not been explained yet. I will explain them. I'm going to walk through the steps. For now, that the lab explains. I'll give a brief explanation of them. Open up a terminal window. And I'm going to type in npm init. And so this is going to get you what's called a package.json file. This is an interactive mode. Um, I'm going to keep, it says package name. So it's essentially prompting me for a package name. I'm going to keep it the default. You can see the default's in parentheses there. I'm just going to hit enter. Call it version 1. So these are kind of like project settings, if you will. A description, I'll just call it lab 0101. Entry point index.js, that is fine. We can leave the test command empty. And git repository. See if I still have that on my clipboard. I do. And leave the keywords empty. Author, Evan Gudmestead. License, MIT. And it will generate this file for what's called a package.json. Is this okay? Yes. Okay, and you can kind of see it created this package.json file, and we'll be diving into that in more detail as this class goes on. For right now, it's just essentially settings for your app. The next thing it suggests are some dependencies. Again, they're not even needed on this lab, but we'll go through them. And again, I'll lecture on this. Um, what these different dependencies are. Um, so we're going to type in the first one, which is a .env file. So I'm going to say npm install .env hyphen save. Okay, and you're going to see it actually is going to pull in a folder called Node Modules. It creates this folder called Node Modules. Inside of Node Modules, you're going to see this dependency that was downloaded, which is again a dependency is code that someone else wrote that we can utilize. So now we have a dependency. There's the first one, which is .env. The next one is called debug. So you can actually click on each one of those on the lab, and if you scroll down a little bit, it tells you exactly the command to write. npm install debug. So you can click on the link in the lab, and you can see the commands that I'm typing here. And the last one is express, which is a little bit bigger. npm install express. Again, these packages aren't even needed right now, but this is good practice for what's to come. Express is installing our web server called Express. And now if I expand Node Modules, you can see it's brought a whole bunch of stuff in that we can use. Okay, install the following dependencies using the save dev command. Let me look at my npm. So you can type npm I is short for install, validate, hyphen, save, hyphen dev. So that's a developer dependency. So which is different than a production dependency. So developer dependency says, hey, when you're in development, bring in these dependencies, but I don't need these dependencies in production. And so validate is HTML validate is going to help us write clean HTML, and that's a developer dependency. So we can do the same thing, npm I style lint hyphen hyphen save dev. That's our linter for JavaScript. Oh, I just realized I made a mistake. And that validate command is different. So let me fix that. What's up? Yeah. What I realized was I installed a validate dependency if I go up, but what I should have done was an HTML hyphen validate save dev. So let me rerun that command properly. And there is an uninstall command. That we can run on that other one. So I'm going to type in npm uninstall validate because I did that one incorrect. And I'm not sure. I'm just going to try it with the save dev switch. Untake off that switch. Let me just try without the switch. There we go. Okay. And what's left? ESLint is the last one. npm I ESLint save dev. Again, this is really not that critical for the lab, but it's a good practice for something we will be doing a fair amount of is installing dependencies. So, good stuff. Next up, I want to pull up an article. Yesterday, I lectured, and on Inside Rankin, I had an outline to my lecture notes, which I'm going to pull up. Hey Grant, were you turning in work on GitHub before, one way or another, or was it typically not turned in on GitHub?
We used GitHub. We didn't really use desktop, but we just used the Git bash to upload it.
Great.
He mentioned the desktop, but he didn't really, Mr. Scott never really used it, so I
Yeah,
had it downloaded, but I never touched it.
cool. Can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with the bash. Certainly a good tool to learn. So yesterday, I had a Node.js lecture outline. So I'm pulling this onto the screen here. And this was a lecture that I did yesterday and put that recording out on the playlist. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a using read line example. Tells you how to actually get input from the user, and this is going to enable us to do our labs. And so you can kind of start with this snippet where we're importing some pieces of the library to get input. We create this RL variable that allows us to write asynchronous code and prompt the user RL question, what do you think of Node? Store that in a variable called answer, and then proceed to output that answer. And so to do this lab, it says create kind of a index.mjs, and so I'll make a new file, index.mjs, and I'll paste in this snippet that I pulled, and I'll run node, and I can start typing index, and watch what happens if I hit tab. It'll kind of quick fill it for me. And so I start typing a file name. It found it, index.mjs. / is the root, so cool. What do you think? And there you go. So it's just basic input output. And so Node is now working, and I will do the first one, and then I got Grant here, and Grant's kind of already worked through some other ones, and we'll take a look at Grant's code. Is that all right with you, Grant?
Sure.
Cool. So the first one is a miles per gallon calculator. And so what you do is you keep the import the same, you're going to keep line 4 the same, and we're going to change line 6. You're going to notice a couple things here. This is an asynchronous method, and so the short thing you need to do is you need to add in what's called a wait, or you're basically waiting for the user to type in their response. That would free up the processing to continue to execute your application, and then whenever the response comes in, kind of come back to it. That's the whole idea behind asynchronous. And on miles per gallon, we'll kind of just do this. How many miles did you drive? And we'll call that miles. Const gallons used. I'll call this miles driven. This is an RL question. How many gallons did you use? So 2 prompts to the user. Miles driven divided by gallons used. And then we say after driving miles driven, after driving that many miles and using gallons used gallons, your MPG is MPG, and you could do like a 2 fixed. You just 2 decimal places. If there's decimal places, you kind of round it. It says use parse flow to parse the string into a number. This returns not a number. And what we can do here, let's just run it before we add. So I'm just going to do bare bones. I'm going to run node. This is called, oh, I still have this named index. So this should be named, I'm going to rename this file. Should have created a new file, which I did not. So I'm just going to rename this file. This is not the right place to right click it here and rename. mpg.mjs. It has to be, remember JavaScript files, these are the the ES modules that are newer. So the file extension is MJS on our file extensions. And so that allows us to use this async await. And so that is allowing us to do our asynchronous programming in a very user-friendly, developer-friendly syntax. And let's try this. Node mpg.mjs. How many miles? 105. We get 20.00. Okay, so now it says use parse float. So um, I'm just going to wrap that entire in a parse float. And we're going to run it again. Okay, so that broke it. So we can't write our parse float there. I'm going to show you where to write it instead. We're going to say miles driven equals parse float miles driven. And gallons used equals parse float gallons used. So you not only have to parse it to a float, but you have to reassign it to that variable. Otherwise, if you just write parse float miles driven, it doesn't reassign it back into the variable itself. And then what we can do, it says display an error message if it's not a number or less than 0. So I could say if miles driven is nan, or is nan. You might remember the is nan function from JavaScript. There we go. Console log error, and you can give a more descriptive else to our output. Okay, now I'm going to right click and format document with. I'll just queue up prettier. Okay, and that's going to not be that pretty, if you ask me. So let me control Z that and format document with. I'm not a big fan of prettier by default on JavaScript. I used to like beautify on my JavaScript. But I'll just tab it over manually for now. So if it's not a number, or that's not a number, or miles driven is less than, is it less than or equal to 0, or gallons used less than or equal to 0. So we got all these error conditions, otherwise it's good, and we spit it out. So let's, like if you put in the letter, fun, A, okay, good. So we cannot run the code as is. We can't parse it to a float because if they type in a letter, we can't do that. So here, I'm going to take these two statements and put them in my else block. So now, if it's not a number, or gallons used is not a number, or if it's less than 0, or if it's less than 0, let's run that. So we'll say A and B is nan is not defined. So my problem is that isnan is a lowercase is and then nan. So JavaScript is case sensitive and it didn't like that I had a capital I there. So fix that. How many miles? A and A. Okay, now we hit our error condition. We run it again. How many miles? -5, -5. We get our error condition. If you hit the up key, that kind of brings you back. How many miles? 105. Okay, now we cannot reassign a constant, which is cool. Let's make it a let. 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 So that's the error I want you to hit. Um, Run it again, 105. And now we get some good output. Test it again, 103. We get some decimal places. So we're only doing the parse float if it is in fact a number. And there we go. That's the first lab. Okay, so that was the first lab, and I walked through it. Now Grant kind of has already done the second and the third. So I was going to pull on his code demonstration and maybe have him walk us through what he did and doing a demonstration. So I'm kind of full screen. Grant, do you know how to kind of scroll in onto your code? Like
I'm not sure what you mean.
zoom in on the text. Yeah, that's better. Can you
And which one first?
can you zoom in just a little bit more? And we'll
What
do
was that?
the temperature converter. And could you zoom in just a little bit more for me? There we go. And do you want to go ahead and walk us through what we got?
Yeah, so I did the 08 RL question with convert to Celsius or Fahrenheit, and then I made an if and else if statement depending on which letter they typed in, and I completely forgot about the I got two upper or anything to save that capital or lowercase, but I just left it as is. And then the I have the constant Celsius that's going to be whatever they enter, and then it does the calculation that was in the Word doc, and then outputs both temperatures. And then pretty much the same thing for the Fahrenheit, except the different calculation. And then I added an else statement if they entered anything that wasn't a C or an F.
Cool. Yeah, it looks pretty good. You got the two fixed on there, so you got that part. You got the isnan, maybe something that you could add. I think that's a requirement of the lab, and I know that I just demonstrated that, so that could be something you could add into there. Testing to
Okay.
make sure it's in fact a number and not a letter, and that it's a positive number, so a greater than 0. But yeah, looks really good. Can you go ahead and run it? Nice. And go the other way with it. Great. All right, so that's a good example of the second one. Again, just a little tweak that I would make, and you're good to go. On the third one is your income tax calculator.
So I had the first question with the single or married, and then the taxable income question, and then again the validation for uh, the making sure that it was a number greater than 0. And then I got all the rest of the data from that link in the description of the assignment. And I believe these calculations are right. They looked right to me. And then it just simply logs the taxes owed.
Cool. Question for you if you scroll up for me. I see the if statement. If you can't parse it to a float, or it's less than zero, it gives an error message. Should you put everything else in an else block so that it only does the calculation if it's valid data?
Oh, yes, yes.
So that would be, yeah, because right now it'll give them an error message, but then it'll still try and do the calculation, I think.
Yeah, right, right.
Very cool. And yeah, so you want to go ahead and demonstrate? Looks good. You could, again, the lab has just a couple requirements about is nan. I'm not sure if you got that, but the calculations, again, if you followed those guides, it looks like you did. Those should be good. It says log the calculated income to the council, rounded up to the next dollar using math.seal.
Oh, right, yeah. I wasn't sure about that.
So if you scroll down, you got your taxes owed variable. You could do taxes after line 36. You could put in a line break, and you might be able to string it together, but taxes, this is, two lines instead of one. Taxes owed equals math.seal capital M S or C EIL parenthesis and then taxes owed. So it'll just kind of round it up to the next dollar, semicolon at the end. Although in taxes, I don't know why you would round it up, but we got a little practice in there, anyways. Go ahead and run it again and see if it kind of rounds up to the next dollar. Should get rid of any change. Yeah, it looks like that took care of that. Awesome. Well, thank you for the demonstration of your code.
No problem.
Then the last thing I'll do is um, get out of full screen there. Kind of walk through the last one, the last lab, which is exercise 4, which is a multiplication table. This one's an interesting problem. I'll create a new file. And what does it want this to be? Called multiplication MJS.
Mr. G, you're not sharing.
Got it. Let me share. Throughout the history of me kind of doing recordings, that's like always, it's funny because, like, you get questions from students, but the number one question that I'm asked, can you please share your screen? I do that all the time. So please remind me, please. Uh, there we go. Spelled multiplication correctly. And really, we just need to bring in these 3 lines at the top. And we need to close it at the end. How big do you want the table to be? 1 to 12. So the question is, we'll call it table size equals weight RL question and what you do is you have nested loops. So I'm going to type in a for loop and I use my hotkey 4, and if I go down to this one and hit tab, that's how you're going to do that. Now, when you have nested loops, it's, the outer one we'll call I, and then inside of that for loop, I'll empty it all out, and then I'll type in 4 again and bring in another for loop, and this inner loop we'll call, for the sake of this, we'll just call it J. Okay, now we're going to say less than table size and J less than table size. So we've got two loops that are looping through some number that the user gives us. And I'm going to start off I at 1 and J at 1 because, we're going to take 1 times 1 for the first number. And then if you understand how kind of loops work, this outer one will stay 1, and then J will go to 2, J will go to 3, J will go to 4. I'm going to say less than or equal to on both of these. That will get us to go through equal to the table size, not just less than the table size. And here I'll do a console log I times J. And if we look at that, it's not going to work, but it'll be a starting point. So if I just do something simple like node multiplication, and I'll do a small number like 3. Okay, so you can kind of see that we're causing line breaks. So every time through a log, that log causes a line break, but we get 1 times 1, 1 times 2, 1 times 3. Then the outer loop goes to 2, 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, and then the outer loop goes to 3, 3 times 1, 3 times 2, 3 times 3. So we're getting the right numbers, it's just a matter of line breaking. Quick little Google search on how to not have a line break. Let me try this little code snippet. Instead of a console log, I'll do process standard out right I times J, and if I say 3, aha, completely different error. Pause. I'm not exactly sure what I was doing wrong. I just played with it and got it working. I replaced my multiplication. I put it in a template string or a template literal, whatever you want to call it. So these are the backticks, and I did a little placeholder, and I did I times J inside of that, and that got it going. You could see that's getting my numbers to go across. But then every so often, after the inner loop is done, I need a line break right here. So I'm going to add in one more process standard out dot right, and we learned how to put a new line. So after the first the inner loop is done, then we do a line break, and then we increment our outer um, loop. And so if I say 3, there we go, there's our table. And so now we're getting that working. And that's just, that's nested loops and, some of those. How does it, I think of a nested loop as minutes and seconds. So you got the outer loop basically representing the minutes, the inner one representing the seconds. 60 seconds go by, and then that increments 1 minute on the outer loop. So that's how I think of it. Let's see. Then there's one last thing, which is the pad start method, which um, can essentially pad our numbers with some extra spacing in here. So um, and so I'll do a pad start. Let me look at the lab and see what this actually looks like. Um, let's see if that is the result that I'm looking for. Um, pad start. So let's say 2 with a 0. So this is the demo code that I'm looking at on the web docs. So again, I reference this for pad start. And you can see here, you take your string, pad start 2 comma 0. And so it looks to me like 2 spaces and adds a 0 in front of it. So I'll do, 3, and I'll just do an empty space. Is kind of what I'm thinking. And if I add that in, okay, so that is working how I want. I want 3 and empty spaces. There we go. So that's the result I'm looking for. And if I say 12, that works until we need more space. But it does work. If I change my pad start 5, then 12 would look a little prettier. There we go. There's our table. Okay, that's a walkthrough of the first lab, just getting some practice with Node and some JavaScript.